My name is Marietje Schaake. I'm a member of the European Parliament for the Dutch Social Liberal Party. And I'm very sorry I cannot join you today in Rio, because I would have really enjoyed the opportunity to catch up with many of you since the first Human Rights and Technology Conference in Silicon Valley. The omnipresence of internet today reminds me of the term Deus ex machina, or God from a machine, literally translated from Latin. And it does seem that some people religiously believe that solutions for all of our problems will come from technology itself, without human intervention. As a politician, I'm more comfortable with how the term Deus ex machina is used in the modern context, one that I believe we should identify with. In modern times, it indicates a phenomenon that solves a problem in a plot that seems stuck, like a superhero or an extraordinary intervention. I believe we should all act like superheroes, not for the internet as such, but more so for the human beings that are using it. I will make a plea for seemingly impossible interventions to preserve the open and unrestricted internet and to protect human rights online, instead of leaving technological developments up to the divine powers that be. A lot has happened in the past year. The situation in the Arab world is still in flux. Where there was initial talk of the dubious terms like Twitter or Facebook revolutions, now Egyptians are in the process of electing a new president for the first time. Iran has continued building an electronic curtain, which eventually will cut off Iranians from the World Wide Web through the use of a halal internet. Internet approved by a higher being, apparently. The Iranian people challenge this in innovative technological ways, finding their own hard ways to stay connected. Some like to speak of the division between open and closed societies. But sadly, increasingly, lawmakers in the EU and the US are acting like an almighty, proposing websites should be blocked or direct messaging should be banned when riots break out. In areas where change came from people, from the bottom up, there are more hopeful signs. Global mass online movements were successful in shelving SOPA and PIPA in the United States, and I'm hopeful that a majority of my colleagues in the European Parliament will vote down the proposed ACTA treaty in July. But there is more work to be done. Too many people still see their human rights violated by the use of technologies, and new threats to the open internet are rapidly developing. I'll name 3 points of concern. Firstly, technological developments do not take place in a vacuum. The SOPA and PIPA bills, for instance, didn't have the subjects of fundamental rights as their starting point, but rather the protection of old business models. They sought to fight digital newcomers to the market. Luckily, by using the enabling power of internet to assemble virtually, to exchange ideas, to get organized, users created a massive outcry which has definitely been heard by policymakers throughout the world. Yes, the internet is a great business opportunity, but it also brings a responsibility for companies to preserve the open nature of the net, to be transparent and accountable. Secondly, governance. When Brazil, together with India and South Africa, proposed a new UN committee dedicated to internet-related issues, a new area of global internet, politics kicked off. The plan to bring the internet under tighter intergovernmental control and eventually to regulate it would depart from the multi-stakeholder approach. And I don't think a UN body could manage the internet effectively, but perhaps this is related to my general skepticism of the United Nations' ability to ensure peace, human rights and development. I believe that a functional and inclusive multi-stakeholder approach, such as often envisaged in internet governance discussions, should see users and their fundamental rights and freedoms more prominently taken on board. Internet governance should see stakeholders from all over the world included, yet we must be careful that emerging economies in which people's rights are too often compromised by economic gains do not start to push universal human rights off the agenda. Thirdly, there is no clear distinction between open and closed societies as long as Western companies are making the technological systems that are used for the single use of violating human rights, full stop. Suggesting that lawful interception is just a technological requirement misses the context of the rule of law, which provides an essential circumstance to be able to either speak of lawfulness or not. It's high time that companies and governments start working together more closely to prevent monitoring and censoring tools ending up in the hands of repressive governments and their collaborators. Digital arms trade has to stop, and transparency and accountability are needed. I see a multi-stakeholder coalition getting behind this point, which is great. When the EU regulates everything from the shape of fruits to the amount of chemicals in toys to the emission levels of CO2, then I would urge you all to get behind the strategic push for these regulations on digital arms exports. I often hear people from the tech community specifically plea against all forms of law or regulation. But sometimes human rights protection requires a clear set of rules and safeguards. These three major challenges cannot be left to the gods from the machines. Instead, we need multi-stakeholder coalitions to be the true players. Besides ad hoc ICT sanctions, such as the ones we accomplished vis-à-vis Syria and Iran, the EU has allocated a substantial amount of money to fund projects by NGOs focusing on digital freedoms and to help internet users to protect themselves in circumventing censorship and monitoring. Also, the European Commission has launched its own initiative to keep citizens connected to the internet, the No Disconnect strategy. So there are some developments leading in the right direction. I'm quite happy that I'm continuing work on the European Parliament's report, which will be a digital freedom strategy for the EU's foreign policy. I believe the EU has the opportunity and must take the lead in protecting digital freedoms globally. I will give concrete suggestions on how to increase transparency and accountability on the side of businesses, how the EU should use its economic leverage to ensure digital freedoms in free trade agreements, and how we should only build new partnerships with third countries if they respect human rights, both online and offline. And for starters, we must be credible in our own policies at home. Otherwise, we can never lead in the rest of the world. Freedom online should be a key part of the EU's foreign policy. In a globally connected world, where traditional borders and jurisdictions are becoming less absolute, the parameters of lawmaking are changing. A clear strategy on how to engage in multilateral fora to keep global internet open is a necessity. I look forward to sharing with you very soon the first draft of my strategy. I'll put it on my website and I hope you'll be reading it, and I'll invite you to give comments and suggestions to make this draft the best it can possibly be. I thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to staying in touch, and I wish you a wonderful RightsCon in Rio.